everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Muchaneta Kapfunde and the founder of Fashioner.com. I feel like these two powerhouses do not need an introduction, but I'll do one anyway. Elisa Lang and Matthew Drinkwater are to fashion tech what Wintour and Lagerfeld are to fashion. Lisa Lang is the Associate Director, Innovation and Skills at Euratex. Lisa and I met back in 2015, if I've got that right, at Republica in Berlin. And I've always found her to be a knowledgeable person when it comes to all things fashion tech. She is, in my opinion, someone who has not stopped inspiring the industry to embrace the magic of technology. When it comes to Matthew Drinkwater, I've found him to be the kind of person you can truly have a passionate debate on the merger of fashion and technology with. He's head of a fashion innovation agency at the London College of Fashion. And I also met Matthew back in 2015 when he was at the forefront of creating groundbreaking brand collaborations that deliver the latest technology innovations across fashion, retail, lifestyle, cultural, and digital industries. Today, both Lang and Drinkwater are playing a key role in identifying fundamental issues that need to be addressed in order for fashion tech to be adopted by a wider audience. So on that note, let's begin. Hello, guys. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's lovely to see you. I'm going home after that introduction. We're done. It's all good.
Can we print this out and get it in a frame?
I think it's a kind of an introduction that's well deserved by the both of you. So thank you for coming over and having this chat with us. So let's begin. You both have been on a mission to revisionize the shape of and future of the creative industries. How would you say what you've been doing has been going? Has it been going well? Has it been well received? Or would you say that it's still quite a long road to travel?
Lisa,
do you want to start? Matthew, it's just like the minority first.
Sure. I mean, it's there's obviously still a huge amount of work to do, but I think what's been really fascinating is over the last 18 months or so, just the explosion of interest in how technology is going to be fundamental in creating experiences for the industry in the future. I think, for so long, much of predominantly the luxury end of the fashion industry was kind of stuck looking at a certain way of working, even though it was very clear to so many of us that things needed to change. And if the pandemic has brought anything, it's been kind of the realization that there is more to just physical product and that we need to look at alternative ways to engage. So yes, still a huge amount to go, and I think that will always be the case. Like emerging technologies by definition are always coming through. So there will be a continuous opportunity to create and engage in new ways. But really buoyed by how much acceleration there has been over the last 18 months or so.
And what about you, Lisa? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm having a party over here because it's kind of like, as terrible COVID has been and still is, it just, excelled the digital implementation and the argument for digital and more technology inclusion so much more. I mean, it's like when I started and I come from the tech startup community, and I saw other old styles industry being heavily disrupted from people from the outside, from people who were so frustrated with the status quo, from people who dared to ask the question, why? And then to fix it with a lot of passion and with a lot of focus of impact. And, so like back then I had like the kind of like epiphany, and that was like the time also like when we met Muchaneta. It was kind of like this, like, don't you see this? It's like, because this happened in other industries. Who do you think you are that you will be protected by this? And also at the same time, fashion always was so innovative. It was so much with emotion. There was always the implementation of technology. Sewing machine, there were robots back then. The textile manufacturing revolution, the immense design power behind it, and people, designers venturing out into other worlds and bringing back their experience into their own industry. So like that always happened. It just kind of felt like that the fashion industry just like lost that while they were trying to scale and go global, and the industry is paying for that, because in the meantime, while like and I want to say that with all respect, like, you know, the old industry seems like to lag behind. There's an entire new industry building up, and they now have the power because they started from scratch without legacy. But I think now this is a time where we have to unite and we have to work together, because there's something very valuable about experience, but there's also something very valuable about like the new spirit. Like imagine if we would start combining them together rather than like complaining about it. I mean, that's like with COVID, it's like the time for complaint is over. You know, we can't avoid, you know, losing time. We have to make change now.
But do you think it comes down to the fact that the industry doesn't see anything wrong at the moment, hence why they don't adopt the technology? So, you know, because when you feel like everything you're doing is perfect and everything works fine, then you're not going to listen to anyone who wants to make changes, wouldn't you say?
I mean, those are structural issues within organizations that have that legacy and history that Lisa's talking about. And I've spoken a lot about kind of those leadership issues. I think, to Lisa's point, there is one of the things that we thought would happen during the pandemic is that there would be an explosion of new businesses from that startup space that begin to redefine what fashion is today. And that is exactly what has happened. And so it's not really on those legacy businesses to kind of sit back and wait. Their consumer was changing, and was obvious to all of us that that consumer base was changing, and the ways in which you communicate with them had to change. They either move and begin to address that or get left behind. And I think, you know, we'll look back at this point 5 years, 10 years from now, and begin to really understand what the shift was. And, you know, those legacy brands, we will see kind of more purely digital brands emerging from this period who begin to build up the same kind of history and legacy that those brands have had in the past. This is going to be such a big moment for the industry.
Well, I think, you know, because before I work in Euratex, I was very often in like the back end room of a lot of fashion brands, and they knew, and they still know that like something is coming, and like because it's been coming for years. This is not a surprise. So there was always the awareness when you talk with certain people, but it was more about like not knowing how to deal with it. And I think this is like with that mindset, especially also for the next digital generation, is like, and it's like the question is not if, the question is just how. And when, you know, we come in as like the supporters and enablers, this is a form of respect. You know, this is a human issue. It's like, because people are afraid of change. It's you know, it's to admit that you don't know, especially in a work environment where you're supposed to know and set the other trend. So it's very concerning and confusing for them, losing power and influence. At the same time, I want to, you know, pay respect for that. You know, a lot of attempts have been made. We've seen, especially in fashion tech, like a lot of brands tried, you know, but the thing is, like from the tech industry, is like trying is a part of succeeding, and only because, you know, one collection didn't work out, or like, you know, the thing with the batteries didn't work or something. It's not, at that point you shouldn't stop. You should actually continue that. And I think like a lot of brands who tried an experiment in the background, especially with the kind of people they have who are trained into this, they now have a huge advantage. But it doesn't mean that like that, you know, they will all die because like they've missed out of it. It's like, no, it's actually on the contrary. It's a huge opportunity for the old style textile, you know, and fashion industry, as well for the young kids on the block. It's, you know, if you choose to see this as an opportunity, then it will be an opportunity for you and not a problem.
And I couldn't agree with you more with the fact that A lot of the companies that I have also spoken to, they just don't have the education. They want to get the technology. Sometimes they get it so wrong and invest in the technology that you're like, what are you doing? That doesn't represent your brand. What are you doing? You're just doing it for tech's sake. You know, so a lot of them, I think, lack that education. And I've always said this, that, you know, in the medicine industry, they always kind of upgrade their education every year, every couple of years, but in fashion, they're kind of staying the same. So maybe the time is for them to be educated, you know. And anyway, when it comes to the merger of fashion with technology, I do really believe that together we are stronger, and that those are words that have never been important than they are today. So as change moves at breakneck speed and slow pace all at the same time, I think the problem is that there is this need for perfectionism when it comes to the industry's adoption with technology. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think the industry is waiting for technology to be perfect before they can actually adopt it?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's held, particularly in the areas that I work in, it's been one of the things that has been a major stumbling block for the industry. I think, yeah, there, particularly from a luxury perspective, there has always been this idea of presenting perfection to the consumer. But you know, we live in an age of perpetual beta testing. Like, we're updating everything in our lives on a daily basis. So every single day you update your apps. I think we are so used to kind of testing new technologies. And one of the things that we found over the many years of doing this is that consumers love that too. I think there is a sense that exposure to something new gives you a sense of discovery, recreates some of that magic. Like, those days of presenting a very polished final image to a consumer feels so very dated to me. And I think there is an opportunity, like you said, Muchaneta, we're stronger together, to engage everybody in that creation process and to become part of that storytelling process. And I think particularly from a immersive technology point of view, you're able to really change what was linear storytelling to putting people right inside the heart of your stories, having agency of their own. That is a very different way to begin to create content for a fashion consumer. And yeah, again, it's a very big shift, change for many, many people in the industry. So yes, it has held it back and will continue to do so. But yeah, like Lisa mentioned, that's kind of what we're here to do, is to hold hand through that process and kind of show what can be done. There's a huge opportunity, but yeah, it does mean kind of relaxing some of the ways that things have been done in the past. And that's not to say that we don't, particularly from a technology perspective, believe in doing things brilliantly and showing something that could be done in an amazing way. But I think so much of what's been done from a technology perspective in the past has been led through marketing needs. This is how a brand presents itself, rather than kind of intrinsically within a business where you would see much more opportunity to experiment.
What do you think, Lisa, on perfectionism?
I think it's about time that we redefine the word perfection, because you know, on the one side you can see perfection is like the desire to reach excellence, and that I still subscribe with. It's just like, you know, pushing it to, like, you know, because perfection comes with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and we also should try to push it. And but I think also on the other side, the dark side of perfection is it makes you inaccessible. And in an age where we're looking for connectivity, for you know, authentic contact, and also like for a certain kind of honesty of, like, you know, it's just like, you know, stuff goes wrong when you try to experiment, and actually celebrate that process and participate, and you know, and let your community, because like, we are not just consumers or customers anymore. We are a community. We are all like micro investors in brands for artists and designers, because purpose is the new commodity. With COVID, with the restricted resources we have, so like, we think far more consciously where we spend our money. So like, you know, you spend your money at an item where you feel like, okay, I also, with purchasing this item, I also support the journey of that company. And in order to have that feeling, it's like, let me in, let me participate in your story. You know, show me your back end, show me like what's going on. And also, so, don't take yourself too serious, because humor is like
Mm,
is a really good medicine. And just like just like have a laugh and be like,
mm,
that's it's about attitude and new mindset, and like
mhm,
enjoy the journey. There is a term in Japanese, because in Japanese there is no word for failure, um, which I love. And my favorite word is like kaizen, which is like continuous improvement. And once you just commit yourself to the story that like you always learn something, you always start with something. My advice at that point, however, would be like, don't try to squeeze everything in, because especially from like the techie fashion tech, we should have learned is that's what
mm,
happens when like Google Glasses, for instance, like that's what happens when you try to squeeze everything in, and you
mhm.
can't. And then you do like the first release, and then they're like, you have so many X factors. Just do it step by step. And that's what fashion and designers are really good at it. Like, focus on the core, do it really well, and there always will be the opportunity for a next collection or a software update.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it is with the industry. I think they just don't want to fail, but they don't realize that failure is not a bad thing. It's time for these fashion companies to really start thinking like startups and really not be afraid of failure and just try something, learn from it, and move on. I've kind of noticed that a lot of the industry people are kind of scared of that. But bringing it to you, Matthew, I was super excited to hear about your latest project on digital human stylists. It's a great way to transform how we interact with our clothes. What kind of implications will this type of innovation present for the European fashion industry?
Some really big ones, I would suggest. It's really funny. It's coming up to almost a year since we put the project out, and kind of the explosion of interest in digital humans since then has been really fascinating. I mean, what we did last summer with Microsoft, when we released the Digital Human Stylist project, was to demonstrate a few different technologies. Firstly, how easy it is to scan people very quickly. So with our amazing partners for Reactive Reality, we were able to scan Lisa and Moyne from my team just with a mobile device, and in a couple of minutes get a photorealistic digital double of them. We did the same for actually their entire wardrobe. And we were then able to put those two together and create an experience where you could interact with them, and using natural language processing, you could actually speak to them. So wearing a HoloLens 2, you could talk to them and they could suggest different clothes to wear. And we were able to kind of pair with Outlook, and it was understand what's in your diary and where you were going, and make suggestions, and kind of look at how we could use that technology to inform that decision of not what to buy, but what do I already have in my wardrobe, and begin to use technology to understand how we could make a more sustainable choice about what you're wearing. It was a really fun project to deliver, but kind of on a more meaningful level, that idea of bringing a digital human into your home to begin to make choices and advice that begins to learn with you and grow to understand you on a more daily basis is something which is becoming ever more realistic. And we were just proof of concept with that project, but just a few months ago, Unreal Engine released their MetaHuman project, which allows anyone to create a digital human very, very quickly. And their role within society going forward will be huge across every sector. I think it's really fascinating, particularly when so many people over the last 18 months or so have been so isolated, to begin to see where that could begin to play a part in our lives, of having a digital person with us. And with every digital project that you create and every digital human, they kind of need clothes. So there's an opportunity for us to show how good we're getting at creating photorealistic digital clothes too.
I do like how your projects, Matthew, show the industry the potential the technology can bring to the table, and how they can use it as a tool when it comes to how their business planning and how they're going forward as a business. Because the consumer demands more now, and I feel like that loads of businesses are not sure which way to go. So your projects kind of open their eyes a little bit to what is possible. And also talking about recently, Lisa, I read one of the articles that you wrote about human-centered movement. And I'd love for you to kind of elaborate on how this type of action is set to shape the future of Europe's design and innovation.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's like what you know, one of the things is like what I'm trying to explain is like that, you know, so, you know, don't be afraid of technology, because technology is here to serve you. And on the other side, you as a designer, be aware of your power, because designers are now so much more important than ever, because it's the human factor. It's, you know, it's really difficult to fall in love with a technical function. You know, if you're like a crazy nerd engineer like me, like, yes, of course, you know, because I read codes like symphonies, but, you know, it's just like, in everybody has a love-hate relationship with technology, and it's, you know, it shouldn't be the fault of the user, it's the fault of like, you know, the product design process, because, you know, it should be intuitive. So, but like designers always in the beginning have been a little bit left out. It was always like, okay, so we do this techie thing, and then you designer just like make it pretty. And I think it's like when we start from the mindset of human centers, it starts with how to serve the user first. And that also, that answer means like we need to have an interdisciplinary team in terms of diversity, in terms of market, in terms of emotions. You know, it's not about to like try to serve everything to everyone, because that's really difficult, and that sets you up for failure. But just say like, okay, so like if you want to solve a problem, you know, what is actually the core of the problem, and try to avoid implementation of technology as much as possible. If you can just like use human design for it. Technology is there to help you to excel, but you have to think and consider the emotions first. And if we look into the history of innovation and like really good examples, what had a lot of impact is you had that's where the human centered was in the beginning. And also like on the other side, that's where things failed. It's like with, you know, if you try to convince just because of technology, it's like, it's not a feature, it's a tool. But it also means it's like that we have to educate. We have to, I always like, I want to demystify technology. It's like artificial intelligence is not like a thing you can bottle up and just like order and, you know, just do plug and play. And if not, you just like add a little bit more slice of lemon on it and try to fix it. No, it's again, it's like, you know, it's like, it's a tool in the entire puzzle of the solution you try to get. And in order to understand, it's like, it also means designers have to understand technical tools. It doesn't mean that they have to be turned into engineers, but they have to understand each other. It's the same thing. It's like when you talk with a textile engineer or like with a, you know, a pattern maker, and you know, just to appreciate and respect the entire complexity, how to create a product. And everything simply just starts like sit in a room and start talking with people, even though it seems like it's the beginning of a joke, like a textile engineer, an electronic engineer, a software engineer, and a fashion designer go to a bar, dot, 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 dot. Oh, and a psychologist and a philosopher would be like really cool to add in the mix. Of course, a journalist, because somebody has to tell the stories for the next generation. You know, and then you already have a party. But just like imagine when you get all of those people together, you know, and they just start talking, and you start with what makes sense, and then work backwards.
I like the way you put that, actually. You know, and I feel the way sometimes you put things, Lisa, you kind of make it all make sense. But let's talk about the biggest conversation starter of 2020, the COVID-19. You know, everyone, this is like, we don't talk about the weather anymore in England, we talk about COVID-19. That's our conversation starter these days. So even though the pandemic has amplified and accelerated technology adoption, according to some experts, some fashion businesses still desire to return to the old ways of working. What do you think drives this resistance and denial to embrace change?
Go on.
Yeah, Matthew, go first. No, we follow the work.
Sure.
Okay.
So it kind of takes me back to the last time I did an in-person talk was end of February 2020. I was in Los Angeles, lovely sunny Los Angeles. Please, can I go back soon? And I was talking about digital fashion, virtual showcasing, virtual product. And there's always been like a huge amount of interest in the work that we do, but it's always been kind of at a distance, kind of, that's cool, maybe one day. And I can remember during that talk kind of seeing people going, yeah, digital clothes, digital catwalk shows, maybe one day, Matt. And then literally 2 weeks later, kind of seeing the whole world collapsing and conferences being cancelled left, right, and centre. And suddenly, you know, as retail stores were shuttered and catwalk shows were cancelled, there was this realization of, oh my God, we're going to have to look at something else. But equally, as we started to talk to an awful lot of people in the industry, there was also kind of this underlying, well, look, maybe we can get through to September 2020 and things can go back to how they used to be, and we can kind of go back to physical shows. And that, you know, that still persists. And I want to go back to physical shows. I want all of that to come back. But undeniably, there has been a massive kind of shift in behavior. All of the things that we're doing now have become second nature to so many people. We understand how to engage digitally. We understand how to communicate in a different way. It's not necessary for the entire industry to fly halfway across the world to see a show. These are things that can change and have to change. And we knew they had to change prior to COVID. I think COVID was, you know, that accelerator. Everyone thought that it was a big change, but all of those things were so obviously wrong pre-COVID. And I think genuinely it is that opportunity for us to redefine where engagement sits and find much more of a balance for the industry where digital experiences sit alongside physical experiences. And as we begin to edge back into a more kind of recognizable world, that those two will be much more interlinked. And we've done an awful lot of work looking at how physical events and physical product can be overlaid with digital content. That is where the industry will go. But yeah, I think for all of the things we've spoken about prior to this, there was a great deal of fear that existed. Nobody knew what was happening. And, you know, if you're a retailer, these were really terrifying times. Like, as long as we've been talking about creating these new experiences for so many brands and so many people, February and March of last year was the very first time they'd had to think about that. And so resistance, yes, lack of understanding, yes, but also an obligation again for us to step in to begin to guide through that process.
Lisa,
I want to hug people again. Like that's like my KPI. Yeah. And also like the thing is, because, you know, with all three of us, we've been like really frequent travelers and, you know, meeting each other. But like, you know, the events is one thing, but like what I've been really missing is like those in between moments, like, you know, going for drinks afterwards, having lunch, you know, sitting on a beer bench at Republica and just like randomly meet and just like having that conversation. So on the other side is, you know, it's like how much CO2 footprint did just like the three of us actually save by like not traveling, right? So it reminds us like the purpose why. So that means that any kind of travel, any kind of meetings will become more meaningful and also have to be better prepared. You know, also because there's like a lot of random stuff because it was like so easy and everything. And, you know, I haven't been traveling for such a long time. I can't even, like, for the last 25 years. Yeah. And I wasn't that unhappy about it because it made me very efficient. I started to cook again. I started to knit again. And it actually helped me to have far more meaningful conversations. I had far more time thinking about stuff, giving time back, spend a lot of time in mentoring. And because all of the time we wasted offline at an aeroplane. I mean, you know, it's besides that, like we are still all afraid, like with the mask and something like that. But like, it's also like I'm offline for 2 hours, 3 hours. Like, you know, I'm online all the time. As hard as it is for like the offline, and especially also for the entertaining industry, the hospitality industry, but I think it's all about like what we're craving for is a purpose and experience, and how can we move the experience in a digital level, but also like back to home, back to us. And there are like so many ways how we can do this, and we kind of forced to. So, and because this crisis, and it's still going on, has been going on for such a long time, it's like there won't be not going back entirely. It just simply can't, because like employees are refusing going back to the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you know. So like, why should you? It's, you know, people are actually like far more happier than that. Of course, also there are a lot of, you know, in the workforce, we've seen like a lot of release for like mental health, you know, missing internet connection, you know, all of that. We now have to take care of like accessibility, because you know, before that we had to go to event because otherwise there wouldn't have been a live stream, or it wouldn't have been published, because it was always like an add-on. Now it's a necessity. And I want to celebrate that, because it gives everyone the opportunity to have access to content, and you don't feel like that you miss out things. You can always go back. But the in-between moments, these are even more important. We can generate that with digital, of course, you know, but, you know, when we going to meet, it's going to be a party, but it's going to be so much meaningful, and we will be like so focused talking about like the main topics, and then a little bit about like other fun stuff, just because we won't have that often. So like, again, mindset has changed, and it has taken so long, and we are not over it. That's the thing. We are not over it. It will be with us for a very, very long time. So it has changed us entirely, fundamentally. And that, again, it should be, and I'm saying that with all of respect, because I know so many people who suffered, and it was so unfair, and it was so frustrating. But, you know, we have to see this as an opportunity, because there's no other choice to have.
I think I would add to that. It probably goes back to the perfection question earlier, Muchaneta, because how satisfied have we all felt with this kind of digital experience over the past year or so? I think it's been good enough, but has it been that aspirational? There have been one or two examples of that, and I think it focuses us on how to improve, how to make this feel like a more immersive experience. And I always kind of feel like, as we're talking now, there is very much a screen between us. Like, I want this content to either be pulled out into my room around me, or I want to jump through this screen and feel utterly immersed in what we're talking about. And until we get to that point, we're not going to be able to deliver the kinds of experiences that people want, because there is that element of, there is a frustration at the moment that it's just not quite there. We've done a lot of really cool stuff. There's a lot more work to do, right?
You know, I think this technology is like, it's like your house phone attached to the wall. We're at that stage right now. You know, we haven't got the one that you walk around the house with, you know, but maybe I'm a crazy person, but I miss going to work. I miss leaving the house, putting a bit of lippy on and a bit of a high heel, walking out the door. Like, you know, my husband loves working from home. For him, it's amazing. He's got all the technology that he needs in order to do his job. But for me, I kind of really miss that. And I do look forward to that part of it, the human part, you know, meeting people, shaking hands, you know, not doing the elbow thing, but shaking hands, giving a cuddle. So how have you been doing? So that's the part I miss the most. But one of the technologies that I want to talk to you about, Matthew, is blockchain. This is something that I've written quite a bit about, and I'll tell you why I want to talk to you about it specifically. You know, it's no secret that there's been a great big hype about blockchain technology in Europe, and I was intrigued when I came across a different perspective from you when you were interviewed by Lampoon magazine, where you said that we don't need blockchain to be transparent about businesses, and that sometimes technology is used when it doesn't need to be used. Can you explain what you meant by this?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an understatement to say there's been some hype around blockchain. So particularly in respect of supply chains, I think that was probably one of the first areas where kind of that blockchain hype exploded. And I speak really honestly, and one of the really great things that we have at the university is the ability just to build these projects, to experiment with the technology, and to give an honest perspective on what we see. And we did some work in the very early days of those exciting hype-filled days of blockchain to begin to test how the platforms could be used and how brands could engage with them. And I think people were throwing up blockchain as a solution to supply chain issues, and without perhaps looking at how that would be applied. I think, sometimes we do look to technology to be a savior when, it's like, well, technology can help us with supply chain and we can become more transparent. Kind of is missing a fundamental point there about why brands are not transparent currently. There has to be some kind of desire to do that. And blockchain is not going to solve the problems that exist within supply chains for big fast fashion retailers. I think fundamentally on a technical level, there's an awful lot in the projects that we've run, a lot of human interaction required in those blockchain projects, because at each stage of the process, you were required individually to log that onto the blockchain. So I don't know, as a digital ledger, this works much better for purely digital interactions. As soon as you introduce a human element into that, kind of the validity of the platform itself is called into question. So that's why, particularly on a supply chain level, and particularly where you're reliant on human interaction, it made very little sense for us. And I think actually supply chain will be very one of the last places that blockchain gets implemented fully across all of that area, because it's very complex to do, and it's going to need brands to actually want to showcase that. So yeah, there are lots of other use cases that have emerged this year for blockchain technologies, which have I guess a more applicable sense, existing purely in a digital world. But for physical product, I still have a lot of questions about how it's being used.
I mean, I liked the fact that you played devil's advocate and you said, why don't people just be honest? Just ask them what's in there. And I was like, that's a good way of putting it.
So look, if they really knew what their supply chain was, they could just tell you. They can just tell you and just show you this is what it is. Like the blockchain project that we had at the very end of that process a QR code that you could scan, which would show you where everything was had come from, all the way back to the individual alpaca. And we actually went to the alpaca farm, so we knew all of that. But honestly, like, you don't need technology to tell people that. If you know that's what the stages are, you can just tell them. And I think that points to a much bigger problem that many fashion businesses have. Either they don't know, which is a problem, or they do know and they don't want to tell you.
Because they know they've been bad, real bad. So they don't want to share that information. Lisa, for you, you've been exploring the fashion tech ecosystem, which can be a bit of a minefield, as we all know. So I was excited to discover that the DeFINE network has come up with an accelerators and incubators map, which is created to facilitate collaborations across Europe. What has been the response so far to the interactive platform, and how can fashion tech companies get involved?
Yeah, I think it's like the idea of the map of the DeFINE project is to show that there are indeed so many companies out there active in Europe, and to just show the power and the potential what is there, but at the same time also for the community itself to actually see and discover their neighbors. And it's just like, it's like a step in transparency. It's just like, hey, this is where we are. This is what you do. That's what we do. Come and reach out to us. Like, we're not hiding. We're welcoming you to join us. And every company is, in a wonderful world of fashion tech is welcome to join. You just go to the website, sign up. Please feel free to share it with everyone you haven't seen on the map, but you know that they should be on it. So get active and share that. And that also will be like the legacy, the positive legacy of the DeFINE network. It's like, look, that's what it is. And like, and that map will live beyond the project, and will be handed over to the next project, and to just like celebrate the community.
See, I like that. I've checked out the map, and I really kind of like that whole idea of mapping out what everyone's doing and where they're doing it, and so you can find those partners much more easier, And I think that's what we need to do in order to kind of accelerate adoption in general. Anyway, is make it very easy for them to kind of adopt it. But
we did that all without blockchain, just to support Matthew's point.
I love the idea of blockchain. I wrote about it, and when I first started writing about it, I was like, "What is this? What the heck? And how is fashion going to play a role in this financial thing?" But the more I've written about it and the more I've read about it, I kind of think there's hope that it can play a role in fashion.
Oh yeah, I love it.
Decentralization will be a big deal. No question about that. It will be really, really huge for the industry. I just think in that particular use case around supply chains, I have some questions.
You found the hole, Matthew.
And also, just because, like, to support Matthew's point, and like, if we would be physically in the room, we would do a high five now. It's actually like with blockchain, because it's so complex. The last industry you actually want to use blockchain is actually the fashion industry, because before you can actually apply the blockchain, you have to digitize, you have to digitalize, and you have to train people. So of course, the easiest way for the industry is like, yes, we're using blockchain, and then you can make excuses to the technology, or we want to be transparent, but it's like really difficult because it's blockchain. And, it's just like another opportunity for them to hide behind the bushes, because we know there are a lot of really dirty secrets behind it, because, they have never been dragged on the digital front. And, I see blockchain. So it's for me, blockchain is kind of like, so this is kind of a Ferrari. It's like a super awesome sports car, like really fancy. It can go like really fast. But if you deliver a Ferrari to a environment where nobody has a driver license and you have to drive it on cobblestone, the Ferrari can be as fancy as you want to if you can't drive it, if it's like totally dysfunctional. So we should now actually more talk about training them driver licenses and pave the way. And until then, we will have the Ferrari with an electric engine or like sunlight or like whatsoever. And then like things will have changed anyway. So as much as I like blockchain, and it has a mission and a purpose, but I don't want to have it as a excuse not to be transparent.
True. Preach on, Lisa. Good point. We're going to tackle some questions from the audience. There is one that's been sent over by Anina Net, and she asks Matthew, can you talk a bit more about the Digital Human Project? What is it and how did it come about?
Yes, there are lots of details on our website. So if you go to fialondon.com, you can find the project and all the project videos there. But effectively, it was about the ability to create digital doubles at great speed, scanning from mobile devices, and then accessing that content through a mixed reality headset. So feel free to jump onto the website and have a look. There's a bunch on there, because I know we're a bit pressed for time. So
another question's come through. It's up for the both of you, and it says, what fashion tech trends are they most excited going forward into 2021?
I think it's like the cross-sector, the result of cross-sector collaborations. And I want to give the disclaimer here is because I was very much inspired by a conversation with Frederick Timor from the Fashion Innovation Center, who's also involved in a DeFINE network, is that, like, look in the gaming industry. Like one of the biggest, in terms of like, we don't want to sit in front of the screen. So like the only way, go into a gaming platform, there you can walk around, there you can actually see people if they're wearing pants or not. And you can have parties and enjoy concerts totally safe and party hardy. But at the same time, it's like that is a sector which makes a lot of money, which has the potential. Just imagine if one of these huge, gaming platforms just decide to go in fashion. They will do that from 1 second to the next one because they can. and they would be fine. It's like, when, the products are not perfect, because, they have such a strong community and they will participate us. So like, and we've been seeing this trend over the years in the background, building, but like now the time is ready. So, I recommend for everyone to start going into gaming platforms and do research, because especially when we do like, 3D rendering and something from a software engineering perspective, you need C++ engineers for this, and they're usually all employed at the gaming industry. So these are the kind of back end, like the seamstresses and seamers, which you need, and I think like that's the place to look forward to. And the other thing also, of course, the whole trend to nearshoring, like is focusing on getting our resources in Europe. The whole debate about recycling. But also, I want to add a twist on this. Like, why do we want to recycle? Because we don't grow our own fibers we need in Europe. This is also, like, for me, recycling is like an in-between step. The big picture is like, we have to start growing and do like the real cradle to cradle, doing like nearshoring from the farm to the production, to the shipment, far closer than to what we've been used to in the last decades.
I love Frederick. He's like my Yoda in fashion tech, so I'm kind of glad. Isn't he just? You could just bring him a problem and he'll just talk your ear off and give you all this great information. I absolutely adore that guy. What do you think, Matthew, with regards to fashion tech trends? What do you see going forward in 2021?
So there's a lot of discussion at the moment around metaverses, which kind of relates to Lisa's point on gaming. But I think amongst all of the many definitions of metaverse that you'll see, kind of the one that I always go back to is the original AR cloud vision, so that we could overlay the real world with digital content. And so many devices now having great depth mapping on them to allow us to create more contextually aware augmented reality experiences. So that, I kind of feel that mix of digital content on top of the physical world is what I really want to see a lot more of. And it will encompass a lot of different technologies, from body mapping to markerless body tracking. So if we can bring all of those things together, we can start building some really cool experiences. So I think that is something over the next 6 months or so you're likely to see a bit more of.
I want to talk about it. Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
Just like a little like boring, but like yet highly fascinating update from Brussels. So also for Matthew to like stay in there, keep going, is like, because from the European Commission side there will be an initiative called a Digital Product Passport, and it comes under the disguise of sustainability and traceability. And so that means, like, as it said, like, every product will have a passport, and that also means it will have to have like a digital counterpart. So this is kind of like the GDPR, and we know what happened when people weren't prepared, but it came from top down. This is going to be another top down. It's like that, to avoid child labor, to reduce CO2 footprint. So this is all in the policy making, and we are preparing for the technical implementation. But that's also like, for everyone, going back to your companies who like want to argue why they should do that, it's not all like only our idea. It's like, this will come from top down. This is like, you have to comply, and that will rattle a lot of companies, especially in the textile industry, who are not prepared for that, but they will have to.
Talking about prepare, I want to speak about something, Matthew, with you directly, about deepfake, which is a term that trended back in 2007, or at least started trending around that time. For those who don't know, deepfake specifically refers to media produced by artificial intelligence technology called generative adversarial networks. You once said, Matthew, that deepfakes provide a quick route and understanding for customers viewing new collections from a brand. Could you elaborate what you meant by this?
Sure. So it takes me back to a conversation we had at the college about, it was particularly at that time when deepfake was really trending, and all of the use cases of deepfake were really quite sinister. And just because we're in that position that we have the opportunity to show how the technology could be used in a more positive light, set about kind of building a project to demonstrate that. And so we scanned a bunch of people at the college and were able to kind of take their faces and overlay them onto somebody else's body, which was really a really fascinating prospect. And effectively what it did was allow you to very quickly see how realistic this is getting. And this was 2 or 3 years ago we did it, and actually it was really very interesting to see the people that we scanned, and when they saw themselves wearing clothes on a model that wasn't their own body, because the system allowed for a bit of height estimation and body size estimation as well, that it looked pretty similar to you. It just wasn't you, and you were wearing clothes that you've never worn before. And whilst it's not as accurate as, say, a virtual try-on would be, so it wasn't kind of trying to solve a virtual try-on kind of solution, or problem rather, it gave an indication that you can use the technology, which was becoming so easy to deploy, and use it in a way which felt like it was adding a bit of positivity to the industry. How could you begin to eliminate some of the problems where people are buying stuff and just sending it back all the time? Could you very quickly give people a rough indication of what they could look like wearing something? And the applications of that are so massive across the industry that, you know, you could apply that within marketing newsletters. You could do it in stores. You go into store and immediately see yourself wearing a collection. Wherever a brand is creating video and they have a model wearing that, is an opportunity for you to deploy that technology. So it was really fun to do, and actually threw up so many questions as we talked about it at the college around kind of the ethical problems around doing it, and how consumers feel about that kind of thing, and where does your data go? These are all really important questions, but fundamentally it was an opportunity for us to show that this could have an impact, and it could do it in a really positive way.
I think technology always brings up the issue of privacy and what you're doing with my information. But I think a lot of people are beginning to understand that having technology, you have to give up something. That is the unfortunate, the trade. If you want the new smartphone, you have to give up certain information. If you don't want to give up certain information, then the 1994 Nokia phone is more for you, you know, where you go with it, can't trace anything. So that is, I think, for me, the bad side of tech, is that need to give up so much information. But we do have another question quickly from the audience. It's for Matthew. Carlos asks you, you spoke about blockchain won't solve any problems relating to supply chains. Could you please spell out the specific problems with supply chains that need to be addressed?
So if I was going to talk specifically about the project that we did, that every single stage that we were logging each process onto the blockchain, it was a human that did that. That is fundamentally a massive problem, because this is meant to be a digital ledger that has no human interaction, which removes any opportunities for this to be altered or changed. And so there's lots of talk about, well, you could embed sensors into products, but at what point do you do that so that the sensor is authenticated as you go through the supply chain? All of those solutions will come about, but there is a kind of fundamental point that that sensor doesn't come right from origin. Like at some point somebody has to put that in. So yeah, when we did it, it was very manual, very human intensive, and I think also shines a light on supply chains are very human and labor intensive. And so trying to introduce a digital ledger solution which requires no human interaction is really, really challenging in a supply chain.
Before we go, guys, you know, I can talk to you guys forever, but and we might need to wrap up in a minute. But before we wrap up, I do have a question for you, Lisa, that since I've got you here, I would love to ask you. You and I have had a lot of conversation about education and how we can push that forward in helping the industry adopt fashion tech. When it comes to change and educating those who want to change, how can the European creative industry break from tradition when it comes to rethinking the future?
Oh, thank you very much for that, Bridge. How much time do I have left?
We do it in, let's say, 5 minutes or less.
I think it's like, on the one side, it's like we have to admit that like the the current education system, especially in fashion, is like in turmoil, because that's usually where you go to universities to get set up for the future, and you don't anymore, is because even also like the teachers missed out to update themselves and keep track of the new developments. So before we even can activate the traditional education system, we have to train the trainers. Having said that, I also know that like a lot of universities are like really trying and started fashion tech focused and based courses, and started to invite like people outside of the industry, because that's where the innovation is. So for every traditional education owners, influencers, start to invite robotics engineers, astronauts, and physicists and philosophers, because it's like a really important conversation to have. On the other side is also like, well, a lot of startups started their own platforms. Every traditional university we have is like, look around the time when they started. They started around the time where there was a new implementation of technology, and like a new trade had to be educated. So like that's where the core was from a lot of traditional universities. So this is happening again. So like, what the universities with the big names we know now, maybe it's like, the names will change, but like the purpose is like, what is education? Education is, giving access to knowledge. And it doesn't matter if you do it physically or digitally, or like with what names you do it, but like, give access to knowledge, and, help to scale the sector. That's the purpose. And I highly recommend to actually look into other sectors, how they are dealing with, the education problem, because the textile and fashion industry is not the only one. And there is a really cool project from the European Commission, which is called the Digital Innovation Hubs. And there's a map there. So you can go there if you just Google Digital Innovation Hub, and you will see where those hubs are. A lot of them are already in the making. Some of them are just in the beginning to get set up. And very little of them are actually involved in textiles. And this is what we want to change at Euratex, is like that we want to team up with, and we're going to already started with the digital innovation hubs, and bring like the textile content, but kind of like jumping on the shoulder of giants, and say like, okay, we have like all of these regional hubs where, you go in and you see like a textile engineer and a robotics engineer, and, they sit in a bar and talk to each other, because, in terms of education, the workflow is always the same.
I think that is a good place to end it right there. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I mean, I feel like we still have a lot to unwrap. We've only just scratched the surface.